Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating and frankly massive world of real estate investment trusts. We're going to see exactly how they measure their enormous environmental footprints. So, if you've ever wondered how the biggest landlords on the planet track their energy, their water, and their climate risks, well, you are definitely in the right place.
We've got a really clear roadmap for today. We're going to start with inside real estate trusts, then move into the SASB sustainability standards and break down energy and water management. After that, we'll look at influencing tenant sustainability and wrap up with climate change risk adaptation. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Inside Real Estate Trusts.
So before we can even begin to understand how to measure a building's impact, we really have to understand who actually owns it. And in this industry, the dominant players are structured as real estate investment trusts, or REITs. The whole idea here is that a REIT allows everyday investors, like you, me, or even massive pension funds, to get exposure to the real estate market without direct asset ownership. You get the financial benefits of owning income-producing real estate without ever having to actually buy a building, manage the day-to-day operations, or, fix a leaky roof at 2 a.m.
And the scale here is just staggering. A single REIT doesn't just own one type of building. They often diversify their investments across multiple property segments all at once. We are talking about sprawling residential apartment complexes, massive retail shopping malls, high-rise offices, cutting-edge healthcare facilities, huge industrial warehouses, and luxury hotel properties, the whole shebang. Now, this kind of diversification is absolutely fantastic for financial stability, but as we're about to see, it makes measuring their environmental impact incredibly complicated.
Which brings us to Section 2, the SASB Sustainability Standards.
So when investors want to mitigate environmental, social, and governance risks, what we call ESG risks, across these massive, varied portfolios, they need a playbook. They turn to industry-specific guidelines, specifically the SASB Sustainability Accounting Standards. Now, as of 2022, these SASB standards are officially under the stewardship of the International Sustainability Standards Board, or the ISSB. This is actually a really huge deal. It signals a major global consolidation. The ISSB is actively evolving these standards so real estate entities all over the world can report their sustainability data in a uniform, standardized way.
But you really have to ask yourself, with a portfolio that spans everything from sprawling industrial parks to dense high-rise hotels, how on earth do we actually measure the environmental footprint of such incredibly diverse assets, right? I mean, a hospital consumes water and power entirely differently than a warehouse. So this framework has to be flexible enough to handle all that diversity, but rigid enough to give investors data they can actually compare.
Let's look at how they pull that off in Section 3, Energy and Water Management.
Okay, so the SASB framework makes a really critical distinction right off the bat: the base building versus the tenant space. If you're a REIT trying to report your energy use, you have to break it down. The base building is basically the energy and water used for central services and common areas. Think lobby lighting, shared elevators, or the central AC. The tenant space, on the other hand, is the actual leasable floor area occupied by the tenants. This distinction is absolutely vital because, while a landlord can easily upgrade the lobby lights, they have way less control over how many computers or server racks a tenant plugs in inside their own leased space.
To keep things transparent, the standards require some serious, meticulous tracking. These real estate entities have to disclose the total energy consumed across their entire portfolio wherever they have complete data coverage, but they can't just throw out one massive number. They have to break down exactly what percentage of that energy came from the standard power grid and what percentage came from renewable sources. Things like wind, solar, hydro, or geothermal.
And it's not just about power, right? Buildings consume vast amounts of water for things like plumbing, cooling systems, and irrigation. But obviously, a gallon of water used in rainy Seattle has a totally different environmental risk profile than a gallon used in the middle of a desert. So the framework literally forces entities to map out their geographic risk. They have to disclose exactly how much of their portfolio sits in regions facing high or extremely high baseline water stress. And they don't get to just guess these risk levels. They have to use objective tools, like the World Resources Institute's Water Risk Atlas, to properly classify their properties.
Section 4, Influencing tenant sustainability.
Now here's a fascinating catch. Even if a REIT owns a hyper-efficient, state-of-the-art building, the actual tenant operations still dominate the overall sustainability impact. The tenants are the ones consuming resources and generating waste day in and day out. So the owner relies heavily on the tenant to be sustainable. But this creates a classic real estate headache known as the split incentive.
Think about it. If a landlord pays millions for energy-efficient windows or a brand new HVAC system, the tenant is the one who gets the financial reward through a cheaper monthly utility bill. So why on earth would a landlord pay for upgrades if the tenant gets all the savings?
Well, to solve this split incentive problem, the industry uses a clever legal mechanism called a cost recovery clause. This gets written right into new lease agreements. It basically says the landlords can invest capital into resource efficiency improvements and then legally recover those expenses back from the tenants. It's a win-win. The tenants get a greener, cheaper building to operate in, and the landlord actually recoups the cost of the upgrades. The SASB standards even require REITs to disclose how many of their new leases include these exact clauses, which shows investors just how hard they're pushing for greener buildings.
Beyond just the legal clauses, landlords really want to measure what tenants are up to. The standard asks REITs to report the percentage of tenants that are sub-metered or separately metered for their exclusive electricity and water use. Because, when tenants have their own meters, they pay for exactly what they use, which is a massive incentive to conserve. Landlords are also leaning into green leases. These are agreements where the landlord and tenant mutually share consumption data, set shared performance targets, and sometimes bring in third-party initiatives to really align everyone's financial interests with actual sustainability outcomes.
Finally, Section 5, Climate Change Risk Adaptation.
Okay, so what does the number 100 mean here? It represents the 100-year flood zone. By definition, that's an area of land that has a 1% or greater chance of flooding in any given year. It could be a coastal floodplain, it could be a low-lying valley, and the SASB standard explicitly requires REITs to disclose their total leasable floor area that sits squarely inside these high-risk zones. This is where environmental risk translates directly to financial risk. If you are an investor, you absolutely need to know how much of your portfolio is at risk of literally being underwater.
Since climate change brings these long-term risks like extreme weather and changing water availability, real estate entities have to clearly outline their adaptation strategies. And this is key. Adapting isn't just about pouring thicker concrete walls, it is a deeply financial strategy. It means evaluating how stable flood insurance rates are going to be. It means restructuring leases or adjusting lease durations in really volatile, high-risk regions. The standard forces entities to differentiate the physical risk to the building from the resulting financial risk to the overall portfolio.
So, when you step back and look at the sheer complexity of what we've covered today, from tracking the energy of incredibly diverse REIT portfolios, to managing tenant behavior through legal clauses, to prepping for coastal floods, it leaves us with a pretty big question. As climate risks rise and regulations get tighter, these ESG metrics aren't just nice-to-have background info anymore. They are core financial data. Will a building's sustainability rating soon become just as important as its rent roll? Honestly, it certainly looks that way. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep an eye on how these standards are reshaping the spaces we all live and work in.